All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into a topic that affects literally everything in our lives, public finance. You know, how a government actually pays for stuff. We're going to follow the money, from your pocket to, well, let's find out. Let's get right into it.
So it really all boils down to this one question, right? You see that money come out of your paycheck, but where does it really go? It feels like you're funding this giant national project, but what is that project actually doing? Yeah, let's break that down.
Okay, so before we can even start to follow the money trail, we gotta ask a more basic question. Why does the government need all this money in the first place? I mean, what's on the national shopping list?
You know, the best way to get your head around this is to think of a whole country like one massive household. Seriously. And just like any home, it's got bills to pay. But we're not just talking about keeping the lights on. These are bills for the very foundation of our society. So if you look at the big picture, the government really has four main jobs. First, you've got setting the rules of the game, the legal system. Then there's building all the physical stuff we use every day, roads, bridges, that sort of thing. Third, there's the whole social safety net, making sure vulnerable people are looked after. And finally, the big one, trying to keep the whole economy on a steady path. You see, these are things the private market it usually can't handle them on its own.
All right, so we've established this massive to-do list that in theory benefits everybody. But where does the money come from? How does this giant household actually pay for everything?
Well, the money really comes from two main places. You've got the smaller slice over here, which is non-tax revenue. Think fees, fines, that kind of stuff. But just look at that huge chunk. The vast majority of a government's income comes from one single source: taxes.
So let's get really clear on what a tax actually is. The most important word here? Compulsory. You have to pay it. And here's the other crucial part. You're not buying a specific service for yourself. It's not like ordering something online. No, you're chipping in to fund the whole system for everybody.
But not all taxes are created equal. You can pretty much sort them into two big buckets. On one side, you've got direct taxes. These are the ones you really feel because they come right out of your paycheck or a company's profits. But then there are the indirect taxes you're paying constantly, maybe without even thinking about it. They're baked into the price of almost everything you buy. So the store sends the money to the government, but really, you're the one footing the bill.
And this leads us right into one of the biggest, most fundamental debates in all of public finance. We all kind of agree taxes are necessary, but how do you make them fair? And maybe more importantly, what does fair even mean when we're talking about taxes?
Well, this table lays out the three main schools of thought on what's fair. First, you have a progressive system. This is where higher earners, like Kabiru in our example, pay a bigger percentage of their income. Then you've got the opposite, a regressive system, where that percentage actually drops the more you earn, which means it hits lower income folks harder. And finally, there's a proportional system, or a flat tax, where everyone, no matter their income, pays the exact same percentage. And believe me, the choice between these isn't just a technical detail, it says a lot about a country's values on wealth and inequality.
Okay, so the money's collected. It's in the national bank account. Now for the fun part, how does the government actually spend it? Let's flip over to the other side of the ledger.
And just like with income, spending gets split into two main categories. First up is recurrent spending. Think of this as the day-to-day operational costs. Paying salaries, keeping the lights on in government buildings, and making interest payments on old debts. Then you have capital spending. This is the big stuff, the long-term investments that are all about building for the future. We're talking new roads, schools, hospitals, that kind of thing.
So if we dive a little deeper into those two buckets, you can see how the money's carved up. A pretty big slice goes to just running the country, right? General administration, defense, police. Then another huge piece goes to social and community services. Think health and education, things we all use. And finally, there's a slice for economic services, which includes everything from grants to, you guessed it, paying the interest on the national debt.
Up to this point, this all sounds a lot like balancing your own personal checkbook, right? Money in, money out. But what happens when the money out pile is way bigger than the money in pile for the year?
And that is where the government budget comes in. This document is arguably one of the most important pieces of paper in the entire country. It's the official game plan, the blueprint for the nation's finances, laying out every dollar they expect to get and every dollar they plan to spend. Now, that budget can end up in one of two states. A surplus budget is when you actually plan to bring in more than you spend. It's rare, but it can be used to cool down an economy that's running too hot.
What's way more common, though, is a deficit budget. That's when you deliberately plan to spend more than you bring in. And you might ask, why would you do that? Well, the idea is to pump money into a slow economy to get it moving again. It's a huge trade-off.
And here is the absolute key connection you need to understand. That deficit, that gap between spending and income, has to be filled somehow. You can't just leave a hole. So to fill it, the government has to borrow money. Simple as that.
And that borrowing, it doesn't just vanish at the end of the year. Every single annual deficit gets tacked on to a running total. And when you add up all the borrowing from all the past years, that is what becomes the nation's public debt.
So it's really easy to look at all this, the taxing, the spending, the borrowing, and just see it as a giant, boring accounting problem. But it is so much more than that. These aren't just numbers on a page. They are powerful, active tools for steering the entire economy.
And this whole idea of strategically using the nation's wallet to influence the economy, it has a name. It's called fiscal policy. It's the conscious decision to use taxing and spending to try and hit big goals, like keeping inflation down or getting more people into jobs.
Honestly, the best way to think about it is like driving a car. If the economy is slow and sputtering, the government can step on the gas with an expansionary policy. That means cutting taxes so you have more money to spend and increasing government spending to create demand. But if the economy is overheating and inflation is getting out of control, they can hit the brakes with a contractionary policy, raising taxes and cutting spending to slow things down.
And that right there is the whole point. It's not just about balancing the books. It's about actively trying to steer the economic ship for the entire country. Public finance is an incredibly powerful tool. Which of course leaves us with a huge final question. If a government has all these powerful levers to pull, all these tools to shape our future, what should the #1 priority actually be? Should it be all-out economic growth, or maybe creating a more equal society, or something else entirely? That's the debate that's always going on, right at the very heart of it all.